Oftentimes in the comics, the future is made up to be a dystopian landscape filled with tragedy and apocalyptic settings. But a lot of the time, the future also brings some pretty impressive superheroes, ones that are otherwise overshadowed by their bleak environments. So I decided to take a look at some of these superheroes and see if we can rank them based on power. At number 10, we've got Punisher 2099. In the future, Jake Gallows takes on the mantle of Punisher, and he makes for a pretty impressive version of the anti-hero. Being a former member of the Church of Thor, he takes on a role as a sort of bodyguard for hire, while also functioning as a police officer under President Doom's regime. He's driven by vengeance after his mother, brother, and sister-in-law are all killed by Kron Stone, and eventually ends the man's murderous streak himself, which is a pretty impressive demonstration of his power on its own. This futuristic Punisher shows some really advanced fighting skill as well, and gains even better stats after he's given a bionic arm. He's also able to blend in very well due to a face scrambler he uses to avoid detection. At number 9, we have Captain America 2099, and I'll be focusing on Roberta Mendez since there are a few versions of the hero in this storyline. This version of Captain America is created by Alchemax, a corporation in the future that forces Roberta to take the super soldier serum and gain her powers. Roberta's Captain America becomes the leader of Alchemax's Avengers and has virtually the same abilities as the present day's Cap, although she naturally doesn't have as much experience as Steve Rogers due to her younger age. She also can't control when she turns into Captain America, only making the switch when she hears trigger words such as assemble to turn into Cap and dismissed to turn back to Roberta. But despite her shortcomings, she's still a really competent Captain America and ranks as one of the more powerful heroes from the future. At number 8, we have Bishop. Bishop is introduced in the Days of Future Past storyline as a member of the X-Men. In this futuristic world, Sentinels have enslaved Earth, and Bishop along with the rest of the X-Men make it their task to fight back. Well, okay, it's not really the X-Men, it's actually called Xavier's Security Enforcers, and is known to be a futuristic organization which is kind of a successor to the X-Men. Anyway, most of Bishop's influence comes when he travels back in time and uses his foresight of the grim future to try and alter his timeline and stop the Sentinels from taking over. He has the impressive ability to absorb any energy around him, including light, magic, or psionic energy, and charge up his own attack, as well as a healing factor and naturally extremely efficient time travel. Much like Punisher 2099, Bishop also has a bionic arm which heightens his fighting and strength abilities. At number 7 is Iron Lad. Nathaniel Richards is a very powerful younger iteration of Iron Man from Earth 6311, and one of the biggest discrepancies between his suit and that of Earth 616, Tony Stark's, is that it allows him to travel through time. As the leader of the Young Avengers, Nate Richards isn't just some guy who gets his hand on an Iron Man suit. He's actually a teenage version of Kang the Conqueror, before his days as one of the most powerful villains in the game. Iron Lad has a pretty good power set as well, with neurokinetic armor which is made from a rare alloy from the 40th century. The armor actually listens to the wearer's subconscious thoughts and basically offers them superhuman abilities based on what they need in any given situation. Iron Lad also has a time-traveling spaceship which is pretty dang cool on its own and offers its own form of power to the futuristic hero.
Number 6. Kid Flash. Bart Allen, or Bartholomew Allen II, is the grandson of Barry Allen and Iris West, hailing from the 30th century. He was a member of both Barry Allen's family and Eobard Thawne's, which made reunions super awkward. On top of his inherited super speed, his metabolism was accelerated, aging 12 years in just 2 years, which caused him to be sent back in time so Wally West could teach him to use his powers. He went on to become Impulse and later Kid Flash before finally becoming a full-on Flash. Number 5. Bishop. Bishop was born in the mid-21st century with the ability to passively or actively absorb all kinds of energy and release it against his foes. This can be used to attack others, or can be held in to repair himself, or even let him become invulnerable if he absorbs enough. He was the son of an Australian Aboriginal mutant who fled to the US. He joined Xavier's secret forces and climbed the ranks before following the villainous Trevor Fitzroy into the past. There he met the legendary X-Men and ended up joining them. Good for him. Number 4. Booster Gold. You gotta have Booster Gold on this list. Michael John Carter hails from the 25th century Gotham and uses futuristic technology in the present to act as a superhero. He wanted glory, so he went to the past and started beating up bad guys with his future tech alongside his robot sidekick Skeets. But eventually his greed and fame obsession gave way to an actual desire to do good, and he found a nice happy medium between cocky blowhard and actual hero. He's just great, especially when he teams up with Blue Beetle, and if Booster's here, we ought to include his son. Number 3, Rip Hunter. When he was first introduced in 1959, Rip Hunter was a modern day guy in the 50s who managed to build a time machine called a time sphere. He went around with his friends calling themselves the Time Masters, trying to solve any timeline issues. But later he was rebooted to be a man from the 25th century, which means he's from the future, and also Booster Gold's son. Huzzah! Also, is it weird to anyone else that in Legends of Tomorrow this Time Master is played by Arthur Darvill, who played Rory in Doctor Who, a show about a Time Lord? Anyone? It's weird to me. Number 2, Cable. Everyone knew this was coming. Cable's been a big part of comics and is currently being thrust into the mainstream thanks to Deadpool 2. Cable has a bit of a strange story. He's the child of Scott Summers and Madeline Pryor, who was a clone of Jean Grey. At one point, Apocalypse infected him with a techno-organic virus that was slowly spreading organic steel throughout his body, which would eventually kill him. However, he was saved by a woman from the future who whisked him 2,000 years into the future so he could be cured. He spent years out there before returning to the 20th century to become the Cable we know and love. As the comics went on, his telepathic and telekinetic powers grow pretty crazy to the point where you could float a city in the air while battling the Silver Surfer. Yowza. Number 1, Batman Beyond. Terry McGinnis is one of the most loved Batman ever thanks to the popularity of his cartoon. Decades in the future, Terry decides to take on the mantle of Batman to eradicate crime in Neo-Gotham with the help of his even more futuristic gadgets than the normal Bats uses. But then in the finale, we learn that Terry was actually Bruce's biological son, created in Project Batman Beyond using the DNA of Bruce Wayne and Terry's mom, who was considered a good match. As it turns out, he was set up from day 1 to become Batman. It was quite the shock, but very, very cool. Number 10, Iron Lad. I've covered Iron Lad a few times in passing, but never really spoke too much about him. This is a young future version of Nathaniel Richards, aka Kang the Conqueror. He was visited by Kang, his future self, and told of his glorious and evil future. And he was like, ah hell nah, and he escaped to Earth 616 in the 21st century. Here he started the Young Avengers, becoming Iron Lad. He eventually had to return to the future due to a temporal paradox, but not before stabbing his future self in the back with a sword. What a guy. Number 9, Marvel Girl. Rachel Summers is the alternate reality daughter of Jean Grey and Scott Summers, who inherited the telepathic and telekinetic abilities of her mom. In her reality, Days of Future Past, an anti-mutant candidate won after Senator Kelly was successfully assassinated, and superhumans were rounded up and jailed. Xavier's school was attacked, and Rachel was the only one to survive, and was brainwashed to hunt down mutants. She ended up being sent back in time to a different reality on Earth 616. She went on to gain access to the Phoenix Force, join the X-Men, and later Excalibur. Nice. Number 8, Wave Rider. Matthew Ryder is a hero from the year 2030 with the ability to see potential futures of people by touching them, and he can also travel through time. He fled to the past to escape a dictator named Monarch and tried to figure out who would become him by reading their futures, in hopes of preventing him from taking control in the future. The good news, Monarch didn't take power in the future. The bad news, he took power 10 years earlier thanks to Wave Rider, but that's okay. A fun fact, the time ship in Legends of Tomorrow is named Wave Rider after this bad boy, so he's basically famous. Number 7, Spider-Man 2099. Now I'll be avoiding alternate versions for the most part on this list, but Miguel O'Hara's Spider-Man 2099 was such a popular character in its own right that I think it deserves a spot. Miguel O'Hara was an engineer working for Alchemax, and after being slipped an addictive hallucinogen, he tried to kick the addiction with a dangerous procedure. The procedure is sabotage, but he manages to survive and ends up spliced with the genes of a spider, gaining a bunch of powers. Cool new take on the Spider-Man story, and the gadgets and villains are really cool since it was based a century in the future.
At number 6 is Hulk 2099. This version of the giant green beast shows similar abilities to the Hulk we know from the present, but instead of Bruce Banner, the conduit of the Hulk persona in this timeline is John Eisenhart. Eisenhart is a studio executive who studies the story of the original 616 Hulk, who by John's era has been dead for some time. During a conflict with a group of Hulk worshippers called the Knights of Banner, John is caught in a gamma bomb explosion and turned into the Hulk himself. Just like the present day Hulk, his skin is bulletproof, he naturally has a huge increase of strength in Hulk form, but the most impressive advantage this Hulk has over the original is that he keeps his full intelligence and personality while turned. Not only that, but John can transform into the Hulk at will. As we all know, this offers a huge boost of power, basically taking out the main drawback for the present day Earth 616 Hulk. At number 5, we have Impulse. Bart Allen is the grandson of the original Flash, Barry Allen, and he inherits all of his super speed abilities. But this futuristic speedster faces a challenge that his grandfather never had to, which is a sped up metabolism. This ages Bart Allen at an extreme speed, making him age to 12 years old while only being 2 years old chronologically. Luckily, Luckily, Bart travels back in time, a trend I'm noticing with these futuristic heroes, and teams up with his cousin Wally West to normalize his metabolism. He then takes up the mantle of Impulse due to his impulsive personality and carries on a similar power set to any of the other Speed Force conduits, with super speed, accelerated healing, and electrokinesis. But Bart has some powers unique to him as well, like a photographic memory, increased hand-to-hand combat, and mechanical aptitude. At number 4, I'm putting Batman Beyond. The only character on this list who was first introduced in his own animated series outside of the comics, Batman Beyond is one of the longtime favorites of many Batman fans. This version of Batman hails from a cyberpunk future where he is portrayed as a younger Batman predecessor, wearing an extremely advanced batsuit that offers the wearer superhuman abilities. He can see and hear through walls, has super strength, speed, and reflexes, and most impressively of all, Terry McGinnis's Batman can fly. Not glide, fly. But I'm sure you knew that already. With some fans online calling this Batman a mix between Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Batman, there's no question that this futuristic version of the hero we know and love deserves a spot on this list. At number 3, we have Spider-Man 2099. This version of Spider-Man is donned by Miguel O'Hara, who intentionally researches a way to turn himself into Spider-Man using technology and DNA enhancement. He succeeds and gains all the powers that present-day Spider-Man has, and more. This version of Spider-Man also gives himself a couple added bonuses of increased vision and hearing, as well as his signature talons and fangs that he gains through his genetic mutation. With these extra powers, there's no debating whether or not this futuristic version of the hero is more powerful than our present-day Spider-Man. When he gets stuck in the present day, Spider-Man 2099 becomes one of the most powerful and coolest looking, in my opinion, superheroes in the world. This is one of the most impressive futuristic heroes to come out of the 2099 storyline, and he's probably the one who's lasted the longest so far as well. At number 2 is Thor 2099. In the future, there is an entire religion based on the mythos of the superhero and god of thunder Thor. Similarly to the Hulk, who also has his own religion. I guess that's kind of a thing in the future. And Cecil McAdams is one of the priests at the Thorite Church who is chosen by the CEO of Alchemax to become one of the few people to be given the power of Thor himself. Not only this, but McAdams and the others who are part of this experiment are then brainwashed into thinking they're the real deal, making Cecil's drive and passion as the hero about as similar to the real thing as his powers are. But McAdams is the one out of all the test subjects who shines out of all of them and basically becomes a version of Thor that has the same power set as the modern day god of thunder. And considering how powerful Thor is in the present day, there's no question that any hero from the future that carries the mantle would end up high on the list. At number 1, the final entry on our list is the most well-known time-traveling hero of them all, Cable. This guy deserves the top spot on the list because he is one of the most high-powered time-traveling heroes in any comic. There are definitely some OP time-traveling villains out there, but this guy takes the cake for the good guys. Son of Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, and Jean Grey, Cable has greatness and power in his genes. Transported to the future when he was just a baby, Cable goes through a series of hardships in what is known to be a pretty bleak future, and returns to the present infected with a techno-organic virus. This virus turns him into a cyborg-like being that has increased strength on top of his already formidable telepathic and telekinetic abilities. With such a dynamic power set, and I didn't even touch on most of it to keep this video short, Cable is the perfect hero to have leading the charge for a better future. He is often in positions of leadership given his foresight into the future and his time-traveling abilities, and often leads some of the present day's most influential and powerful heroes into battle. He is usually seen as a prophet who takes on the impossible task of changing the outcome of the future for the better of humankind. And with everything he brings to the table, he has to be considered one of the most powerful and impressive superheroes to ever come from the future.
Number 10, Cable. Cable is not only dangerous to others he comes up against as a hero, but he's even dangerous to himself. Cable is a badass from the future who is taken there in his youth to protect him and ensure his survival. He has since made his way all across and through time, and has even returned to the present from the future, which is his past. yeah, it's a lot of time travel stuff. It can get a little confusing. When Cable dies, it isn't even because anyone else took him out either, and he even saw it coming, because it turns out that his younger self was the one responsible, a version of the character we often refer to as young Cable or Kid Cable. So yeah, Cable is deadly in the sense that he'll do whatever he needs to, even if it means ending his own time loop by killing his older self. Does that make sense? I hope what I said just made sense. I think it made sense. Number 9, Old Woman Laura. X-23's future self ends up in a much nicer alternate future reality than her genetic father Wolverine. Old Man Logan's reality? Wasteland, lots of death and people who have gone insane. Cannibalism. Old Woman Laura's reality? A sort of futuristic paradise where Kamala Khan ends up as president. But even still, her future isn't perfect, because Laura is dying. Her genes have become unstable in her old age due to a flaw in the cloning process that made her not so good. The other thing that's not so good? Doom is holding the people of Latveria hostage, and it's up to Laura to put a stop to it. This version of Laura from the future is just as deadly as her main continuity counterpart, but with added years of experience, and is willing to do whatever it takes to defeat Doom, even if it means killing him and possibly sacrificing herself to do it. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you love time traveling as much as I love time traveling, click that like. Every time you click that like, there's a chance you could go back in time. That's not true, but wouldn't it be cool if when you clicked like on videos, you could time travel? That would be pretty cool. Number 8, Old Man Logan. Old Man Logan stays a hero in the future, but only because he doesn't have much other choice, really. Really, all Logan wants to do is live his life without having to think too much of all the deaths of his friends that he's responsible for. Logan in the alternate future of Earth 807128 ends up killing all of his fellow X-Men after being tricked into thinking they were all villains by Mysterio. Not only was he capable of causing all of that death, but further into the future, he goes up against a powerful and horrific villain in his time and reality, facing the head of the Hulk gang and also sort of his landlord, Pappy Banner, aka Old Man Hulk. Something went wrong with Bruce Banner as time went on in this reality, and he basically lost his mind, likely as a result of that gamma radiation affecting him well into his elder years, and not in a good way. Logan ends up being swallowed whole by Hulk, but defeats him in the end by cutting his way out of Old Man Hulk's gut. It's pretty gross. Number 7, Green Lantern. Jessica Cruz from our time might not be quite so dangerous yet, but when we glimpsed into her possible future in the Future State line from DC, we learned that there is a future version of her who becomes a Yellow Lantern, joining the Sinestro Corps. Not all Yellow Lanterns are bad, but because they are generally about instilling fear in others, they more often than not tend to end up becoming deadly supervillains, and that's usually who they are. Jessica Cruz found herself stranded on a Green Lantern base and outpost without her powers, and when Sinestro Corps members showed up to investigate, found herself offered a Yellow Lantern ring after her fight against them had resulted in her overcoming her own fears and instilling fear into the hearts of her enemies. Which I'm not gonna lie, I really like that twist in the future for Jessica. I think Jessica as a Yellow Lantern is really cool.
Number 6. The Ancient One, MCU version. During the events of the 2016 film Doctor Strange and the 2019 film Avengers Endgame, the Ancient One used the Time Stone to accurately predict the future. The first was when she knew how she would eventually die. She had seen it and she knew it would happen. The second was when she knew Doctor Strange would become the best sorcerer of all time. She mentions that to Bruce Banner, and it's why she ends up giving him the Time Stone, because she knew Strange wouldn't have just given it away for no reason. Like, he wouldn't do that. Which leads to when Stephen Strange first shows up. The reason she was being so hard on him, like by pushing him to his limits, to even kicking him out for a brief time, it was because she knew what he would become and how crucial he was for the future of the entire Marvel Universe. Number 5, Ulysses Kane. He has the ability to predict the future, and was a crucial factor in the Second Civil War in the Marvel Universe. Basically, it was because one side believed that they should use this ability to stop criminals before they can even commit their crimes. The other side believed that, that was wrong, and that brought us to Civil War II. Now, during this event, he has trouble controlling his powers, but predicts multiple futures. One where he foretold of a celestial being destroying the Earth, and the other where he had a vision of Thanos attacking a Project Pegasus facility to steal the Cosmic Cube. Both of which were stopped, but they would have come true if he didn't step in and say anything. Number 4, Norman McKay. Norman comes from one of the greatest Elseworld stories ever written, Kingdom Come. Norman, a pastor who ends up inheriting the ability of his friend Wesley Dodds, the former Sandman. While Wesley was in the hospital, he kept going on about these visions he was having of an apocalyptic future. Norman believed he was just seeing things and that it wasn't real. But when Norman ended up inheriting the abilities of Sandman, he now sees this apocalyptic prophecy of the future that Wesley wouldn't stop going on about. He's later contacted by the Spectre, who explains that he must help prevent the future. Also, if you haven't read this comic, guys, do yourself a favor and read it. It is absolutely phenomenal. Number 3, the Monitor. Also known as Bar Nouveau, the Monitor hails from DC and has predicted the future both in comics and during his live-action appearances. He's most known for his role during Crisis on Infinite Earths in the comics, but more recently, the Arrowverse crossover. He knew the crisis was coming and decided to start preparing different Earths in the multiverse by testing its heroes. He did this by using the Book of Destiny. It was pretty extreme since he essentially destroyed Earth 90, that's the home of the Flash from the 90s TV show, but he was doing what he thought was right, and at the end of the day, the heroes did end up coming together to stop the Anti-Monitor. Number 2. The Spectre. Now, the Spectre, who I mentioned earlier, has been a title for multiple people throughout the years. The Spectre is one of the most powerful beings in the entire DC universe. He is basically the embodiment of God's vengeance. He needs a human host, though, to operate on Earth, and he has had multiple hosts throughout the years, the most famous being Jim Corrigan. Now, the Spectre has seen multiple futures. He can't always intervene, though. But one of the more recent ones was actually during a live-action appearance of his during the Arrowverse crossover, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Jim Corrigan showed up and bestowed his power to Oliver Queen, saying that Oliver would be the one to save the entire universe. Oliver then took the power and went on, and yes, he did end up saving the universe by using his powers to jumpstart a brand new multiverse, which by doing so, ended up killing him. Though the Spectre is a very powerful being, I am willing to bet that even though Oliver is gone, the powers will live on in a new host. Or who knows, maybe Oliver will come back as the Spectre. Number 1, Doctor Strange, the MCU version. During the events of Avengers Infinity War, Dr. Stephen Strange used the Time Stone to accurately predict the future. He did see over 14 million possible futures, but he saw the one where they would win, and it ended up happening. He knew that the Avengers would eventually come back together, go back in time to the previous moments in their past, get the stones, and make their own gauntlet, and bring everyone back. Also, he knew that amazing final battle was coming up with every hero from the MCU teaming up to take on Thanos and his army. Which, come on, that is probably the coolest scene in comic book movie history. So, we gotta thank for that. At number 10, we got Jor-El. The father of Kal-El, aka Superman, Jor-El is one of the most important characters in DC mythology. Not only did Jor-El send his son to Earth, where he became one of the greatest superheroes of all time, but he was also the one that predicted the end of Krypton. He knew it was going to perish, but no one really listened to him. And, well, we all know how that turned out. Boom. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Jor-El was able to figure it out, and because of that, he and his wife Laura were able to save their son. Number 9, Tony Stark, the MCU version. While technically he didn't predict it himself, he was able to take the information that was given to him, which, was a little vague, and figure out what was happening. During the events of Avengers Age of Ultron, while under the influence of Scarlet Witch's spell, Tony sees a very eerie future where the Avengers are all dead. Now, this sets him down a path of trying to prevent it at all costs. In Avengers Endgame, he mentioned the future to Steve and the team, saying he knew that they would lose, and, of course they did. And lots of people did die, but luckily that's not how it ended. They end up coming back and fixing almost everything, and Tony gives up his life to make sure that it happens. Number 8, Dr. Manhattan. So this one is very interesting. Dr. Manhattan is kind of his own thing. He's not good, he's not bad, he's just, himself. And basically, he knows everything, past, present, future, but he doesn't prevent it, because to him it's already happening. And I know that's confusing, but let me try to explain. Okay. For example, in the Watchmen graphic novel, he knew the president would be shot, so when it showed up in the paper, he wasn't surprised. When asked why he didn't prevent it, he said, "I can't prevent the future. To me, it's already happening." Dr. Manhattan experiences his past, present, and future all at once, so that's why he can't really do anything about it. Number 7, Madam Web. Oh, the mysterious Madam Web. Over the years, she has shown countless times how she has seen all possible outcomes of any given future, usually always regarding the spider people of the Marvel Universe, which she refers to as the web of life, which is every outcome for any given choice a hero should potentially make. The second Madam Web, Julia, even managed to convince Peter Parker not to kill Kraven the Hunter. She knew it would send him down a path that, he could never come back from, because she had already seen that path, and it wasn't very pretty.
Number 6. Iron Lad. Though this character's armor is quite similar to Tony Stark's and shares many of his Iron Man suit's features, hence the Iron Lad name, this is actually the younger version of the one known as Nathaniel Richards, aka Kang the Conqueror, or aka his other 30 names. In the year 3016, Nathaniel Richards gets rescued by his future evil self before a lethal attack by bullies. Nathan is given new armor and trained by the villain to make himself even better, if that makes sense. Time travel. But this inadvertently made the young Nathaniel turn against his future older self, and he uses the armor to travel to the modern day Earth 616. From there, Iron Lad's armor allows him to create temporal divergences, which let him manipulate time and travel through it. Now, going back in time, he eventually became the leader of the Young Avengers in order to balance the scales for things that he would do later in life. But because time is complex sometimes, he inevitably goes on to actually eventually still become Kang the Conqueror and do all the horrible things that Kang the Conqueror does. Even knowing your future doesn't stop you from being able to change it, apparently. I guess. Number 5. Bart Allen. Bart Allen was born in the late 30th century, which is around the same time of the Legion of Superheroes. He is the grandson of Barry Allen, which meant that Bart was born with his grandfather's super speed instead of having to receive it in an accident. Unfortunately though, Bart also suffered from a super hyper-accelerated metabolism, which means he was aging at an insane rate. Like when he was 2 years old, he looked 12. To stop Bart from developing mental problems, Bart was placed in a virtual reality that kept pace with his aging. Now it turns out that doesn't really solve the problem at all. Instead, his grandmother, Iris Allen, decided to take Bart into the past to find Wally West, the third and arguably most powerful Flash. Now Wally pushed Bart to use his super speed at extreme new levels, which shocked Bart's metabolism back to regular speedster levels. Because of his time in the virtual reality though, Bart had no concept of danger, so he just kept acting before actually thinking. Batman, having the best sense of humor, decided to give Bart the nickname Impulse. Number 4. Rip Hunter. Rip Hunter is actually the future son of Booster Gold, who we talked about earlier, which raises a lot of questions. But he is also the DC Universe's leading authority in time travel. If you'll recall, Booster is from the future and used Rip's own technology to travel back in time in the first place. But this was before Rip was ever actually born in Booster's timeline, and now you understand why time travel is incredibly confusing. Other than being Booster's son from the future, Rip Hunter's origins and true identity are actually a total mystery. But this is on purpose, as keeping his origins and identity a mystery safeguards this time-traveling hero from time-traveling villains that would try to erase him from existence. And that's because Rip Hunter defends the time stream as a time master. Very cool. In his earliest appearances, his portrayal was more in line with the serial type of adventure he was involved in, so more adventure-based stories than a true superhero. Until the 1980s, when he became much more focused on the future implications of present events, which led to a worldwide apocalyptic event, and it was his obsessive goal to try and stop it. Now more recently though, his origins seem to suggest that he is from the 25th century, and now he's more of a protective overseer. But in all his iterations, he's cool as hell, and how could he not be with a name like Rip Hunter? Super cool. Number 5. Number 5 was one of the 43 children born at once, and one of the 7 children adopted by Sir Reginald Hargreaves in Dark Horse Comics' Umbrella Academy. 5 has the natural born ability to travel through time. While he isn't technically from the future, at the age of 10, 5 traveled 20 years into the future and found himself in an apocalyptic wasteland, forcing him to spend decades trying to travel back to his native 1960s. The failure of this slowly drove him completely insane. When he finally did travel back in time, he was captured and modified by the surgeons of the Temps Aeternalis, who mixed strands of DNA from a bunch of killers with Five's own DNA, which somehow made him the perfect killer, quote unquote. They also helped refine his powers though, teaching him how to perform micro jumps in time, making him incredibly fast. When he rebelled against the Temps and finally returned to the past, 5 days before the apocalypse, Five regressed back from an old man to an unaging 10-year-old in transit. And that's why he remains the only childlike member of the Umbrella Academy when he is technically a fully grown man in a child's body. Freaky. Number 2, Wave Rider. The original Wave Rider would be Matthew Ryder from the year 2030. Now in this future world, the world has been ruled for 20 years by an armored despot known as Monarch, who has destroyed all of Earth's superheroes. Ryder was rescued from a collapsing building as a child by an unknown superhero, which inspired him to fight back as an adult. Knowing that Monarch had once been a hero before some unknown event turned him to evil, Ryder volunteers as a time travel test subject in hopes of traveling to the past and preventing Monarch from ever coming to exist in the first place. But where other similar experiments failed, his succeeded. Matthew entered the time stream and became Wave Rider, able to move back and forth through time as well as see people's most likely futures by touching them, which is super cool. And finally, in at number 1, it's Kiyoshi Morales. When a group of 5 Captain Americas from different realities are brought together in Captain America Corps number 1 from 2011, we get a look at Kiyoshi Morales, the great-grandnephew of Luke Cage and the 25th century's Commander A, which I'm sure the A stands for America. Kiyoshi is a much more physically imposing character, standing at what looks like almost 7 feet tall, and he was definitely the most physically imposing Captain America among the Captain Americas gathered. Instead of using a vibranium shield, Kiyoshi's suit can generate energy shields on each arm, which resemble the normal Captain America vibranium shield, kind of like Captain America 3099. Now his suit is much more advanced as well, as you'd expect from the 25th century Captain America stand-in. For example, it features a neuroweb, which allows him to tap into wireless systems and stored information. He had all the enhancements we'd expect from a Captain America, and he is just a super cool character who I really hope we get to see more of in the future, but for now, he is definitely my favorite of the members of the Captain America Corps. Number 10, Bishop. Bishop comes from a terrible 22nd century that became a pretty horrible dystopia after an event called the Summer's Rebellion. Bishop wants nothing more than to prevent this future from happening, and that is basically his entire personality. To prevent his future apocalyptic future, he travels back to the present day to find the X-Men and to become Professor Xavier's bodyguard. Eventually, Bishop seems to think that his future is created thanks to the birth of Hope Summers, which leads to him becoming a bit of a villain, but also leads to a conflict with someone we will talk about in just one sec. Now, his time-jumping abilities are granted by a cybernetic arm that he possesses, but his actual mutant ability is to absorb and redirect any kinetic energy that is used against him or that is released in his general vicinity. He's easily a favorite X-Men for a lot of people, even if he lets his knowledge of a possible future guide his actions into some unfavorable places sometimes. Number 9, Cable. Cable, or Nathan Summers, is the offspring of Scott Summers and Madeline Pryor, which should make you think that this guy isn't from the future at all. You see, Mr. Sinister had planned the birth of Nathan, hoping that he could use Nathan against the mutant known as Apocalypse, but that didn't work out. Instead, Apocalypse infected Nathan with a techno-organic virus. Because of this, and because his parents feared Apocalypse would hunt Nathan down, they sent their child to the future. It is true that adult Cable and Apocalypse do have a lot going on, as Cable does return fully grown to the modern day to stop Apocalypse, but also to face an evil version of himself. It's a lot, but that's time travel. Cable has not just one, but 2 modes of time travel. He can use a special future gadget to transport himself as well as his allies to a different point in time, but Cable can also use his telepathic abilities to send his astral form back in time as well, although he's only ever done that once. If you think about it, I'm technically talking to you from the past, since this is being filmed like 3 days before it goes up, or maybe it's months since I filmed it, maybe even years. You should like this video or comment and send a message to past me so that me, of your present, aka my future, can see it and appreciate it. Number 8, Spider-Man 2099. Instead of getting bitten by a radioactive super spider, Miguel O'Hara's DNA was biologically mixed with the spider's DNA to save his life after he was forcibly hooked on a not far off future substance by his employer. If that sounds convoluted, well, yeah, it is, but it also sounds right at home in a comic book. Although the process of gaining his powers differed from Peter Parker, Miguel O'Hara was still granted many of the same abilities at a pretty similar level as Spider-Man. One thing that differs largely from Spider-Man is Miguel's spider sense, because he doesn't have one. Instead, Miguel has advanced super senses like Daredevil. Miguel also has some abilities that are just wholly unique to him, like super speed or telepathic communication abilities, which are both really cool. He also has fangs and claws that are not so cool. They're more like freaky, but they're cool for combat, I guess. On top of all those powers though, Miguel is from the year 2099, which means that he naturally has a much more advanced set of technology at his disposal when he finally comes together with the Spider-Verse. Number 7, Booster Gold. Booster used to be a star college football player in the future who was caught betting on his own games and was expelled. So, luckily, this isn't a list of morally upstanding heroes. Booster got a job at a space and superhero museum, and in keeping with his interesting choice of morals, he found and stole Rip Hunter's time sphere, along with a bunch of other superhero gadgets. Using his future son's time sphere, he went back in time with the museum's robot named Skeets. Now, thanks to his knowledge of future crimes that would come to pass, he could easily go and stop them, and he did this becoming a hero, earning himself both profit and fame. Thankfully though, he did actually find some humility and eventually became a real hero, traveling throughout time, fixing the cracks in history and fighting evil time-traveling threats with no praise or applause except for, of course, us readers.
And at 6, Cable. Cable's first appearance was in the New Mutants number 86 and a next issue teaser, which was followed with a full appearance in the New Mutants number 87. At first, Cable was meant to be an entirely separate character, a new leader that contrasted their first mentor, Professor X. However, he was later written to be a future version of Nathan Summers, the son of Scott Summers and Madeline Pryor, also known as Jean Grey's clone. He's from the future since as an infant he was transported to the future where he grew up to be a cybernetically enhanced warrior before returning to the present because comics. There's also a young version of Cable that comes from not as far in the future, that he comes back and then kills his older self because he wouldn't send the X-Men back to their proper time. Something which young Cable does to keep time intact, but then he resurrects his father using a bit of the Phoenix Force, which is basically the same thing that old Cable was doing, but like, So an even younger version of Cable comes along and kills young Cable. Okay, not really, but can you imagine how screwy that would be? Like a baby Cable just pulled up in a stroller and shot him in the head. Oh my god, I need that. Oh, Boss Baby number 2. I think that would be kind of funny, but also really headache inducing when it comes to the timeline and paradoxes and whatnot. But, you know, typical comic book scenarios. Halfway through number 5, Rip Hunter. Rip Hunter is one hell of a man. He is a time traveler, guardian of the time stream, leader of the Time Masters, and previous leader of the Legends of Tomorrow. Rip spent his entire life planning for enemies a time traveler would face, so in an effort to prevent someone from killing him as a child, he invented the alias of Rip Hunter, when he is in fact the son of Booster Gold, something that not even Booster Gold knows. Rip invented time travel technology in the post-crisis universe, and has helped both Booster Gold and Animal Man in their time-traveling escapades before taking on the Illuminati conspiracy. This dude took on the Illuminati. If this video gets demonetized, just know that it was them. Rip eventually ended up getting stranded in the past in the prehistoric era. Somehow he was able to return to the present, and after doing so, he began protecting Earth's heroes from time-traveling villains. In the CW's Legends of Tomorrow, Rip assembled a team of heroes who were known as Legends in the future in an effort to prevent Vandal Savage from taking over the world and killing his family as he had in his timeline. But it was later revealed that he picked a team of individuals who weren't remembered by time, and that wouldn't be missed if they died, even though Sarah Lance had come back from the dead like 3 separate times at this point. Then at 4, Old Man Logan. The world of Earth 807128 has been conquered and divided among supervillains, with territories belonging to the Abomination, Magneto, Doctor Doom, and the Red Skull, who had named himself President of the United States, which sounds an awful lot like what the Beyonder did in the Spider-Man 90s cartoon, where he sent the Red Skull, Doc Ock, Doctor Doom, and the Lizard to a planet unknowing of evil to see how they would react. And those 4 villains took over the planet and ended up having Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Captain America, and Storm, along with the Lizard, take them down. However, in this story, Logan lives with his wife and children in California until the Hulk Gang, which is a group of what I'm going to call Hulklings, created when Hulk had assaulted his first cousin, She-Hulk, and then the Hulklings kill his family. And Logan says the Wolverine persona had died when the villains attacked and conquered, only using his claws once after that event. His mission was to get revenge for his family and kill Maestro, a future version of the Hulk. And in the Venomverse, this version of Old Man Logan raises Bruce Banner Jr. for 15 years before telling him of his true parentage. At that point, Bruce gets mad and storms out, which is really weird and confusing. Why would you do that? Your father was a psycho, of course he wouldn't tell you. In the 3 Batman Beyond, after everyone Batman cares about is dead, he's given up fighting crime. But an athletic 16-year-old named Terry McGinnis, Terry is his name and I know it. After stumbling upon the Batcave, Terry realizes who he really wants to be and begins fighting crime under the tutelage of Bruce. But Terry has the aid of a new age high-tech bat suit that augments his abilities, which I don't really understand, but hey, it's 2039, so who knows what tech we will have by then. However, Batman retires in 2019, so technically at this point he isn't fighting crime anymore. I know that he still has comics being published, but like, he isn't retired, but he is also retired. Like, no more Batman for you. Also, Terry, his name is Terry. I will not make the same mistake again. It's Terry, not Tyler. And if you don't understand, I accidentally started calling Terry Tyler because I was just typing and wasn't paying attention, so I just typed Tyler. Yeah, I called him Terry at the beginning of that number, just not the rest of the time. It's kind of a joke here now. When I first started. And to Connor Hawke. The CW has had quite a bit of time travel over the years, and while in the comics Connor Hawke may be the son of Oliver Queen, on TV he's actually the adopted son of John Diggle. Originally in the timeline, John Diggle Jr. was Connor Hawke, but after Flashpoint and XS changed the timeline, John Diggle Jr. became the new Deathstroke and leader of the Deathstroke gang. And the hero known as Connor Hawke is the son of Ben Turner, aka Bronze Tiger, and Sandra Hawke. Bronze Tiger did actually renew his name when he helped Oliver stop the riots after Diaz attacked the prison in an effort to kill Oliver, but eventually Ben ended up dying due to a stray arrow that Connor couldn't stop. If the timeline from the Legends episode of Star City 2046 is still canon, considering how at that point he was John Diggle Jr., not Connor, but I don't know. I can't confirm. A lot of things in the show got screwy. Anyways, he was brought to the past when the Monitor brought him, Mia Smoke Queen, and William Clayton back after Renee's daughter had just been killed by John Diggle Jr., so that they could meet their fathers in their prime and help in the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, which only Mia ended up helping in. So, yeah, the other two kind of like didn't show up. So yeah, thanks for that. It's not like the universe was ending or anything. Finally, into number 1, Old Man Peter. Old Man Peter is probably the most horrifying story on this list. The story of Spider-Man Reign is a 4-issue comic limited series set 30 years into the Spider-Man of Earth 70237's future. In this future, New York City is essentially a safe area, even if it's under total control of its mayor. Superheroes and supervillains are gone, but the government has an incredibly ruthless police force known as the Rain. Peter works as a florist but ends up getting fired because he's Peter, but when he gets home, there is news of police brutality coming from the Rain. J. Jonah Jameson delivers Peter a package, not like that. He also apologizes to Peter, saying he sold the paper because of the lies. Inside the package was Peter's old camera and the black-suited Spider-Man mask. When J-Cubed starts a riot, Peter puts on the mask and fights off the Rain wearing only his mask and his underwear, which is disturbing on its own. But the worst part about this is that Mary Jane is dead, dying due to being exposed to radiation thanks to trying to have kids with Peter. Meaning that Spider-Man is so radioactive that his swimmers killed his wife. Which is horrifying and has way too many implications, and I don't want to think about it. Did they have like 5 heads or something? Great, now I'm thinking about it. In its 10, Booster Gold. Michael John Carter started off as a glory-hogging show-off from the 25th century. Michael is a gifted athlete, getting to attend Gotham University on a football scholarship, until his father came back into his life. After leaving because of a gambling problem, Michael, desperate for the approval of the father he just met, gets convinced to intentionally lose football games for gambling purposes. But when he was discovered, he got expelled and ended up getting a job at the Metropolis Space Museum. However, with the aid of a robot named Skeets, Michael stole devices from the museum displays about superheroes, including a Legion of Superheroes flight ring and Brainiac 5's force field belt. With the help of Rip Hunter's time sphere, Michael traveled to the 20th century, intent on becoming a superhero and turning it into a business for his own gain, which I mean, kinda smart. Like what Billy thought during the beginning of his superhero career in the Shazam movie. Eventually, Booster Gold ended up discovering his true abilities and actually liked the whole superhero thing. So he just stuck to it without as much of a hidden agenda. And at 9, Future Flash. While some may consider Future Flash as a villain, and it's technically true, he is still Barry Allen with a cause that seems fairly normal, at least in the comic book version of normal. While yes, the villains justify their missions, Barry's mission was to kill himself in order to prevent Wally from dying, thus changing the future, and thus everything he did in the future would be obsolete. He wouldn't have needed to kill all the rogues or any other villain, and he wouldn't be alive to do it, thus saving everyone else in the future, since he only killed them to gain enough speed to travel back in time. So while yes, he did kill a lot of people, he did it so that it wouldn't happen, so technically he killed them in order to save their lives. So it's a very noble cause. We talk about weird stuff like this literally all the time, and it's kind of sad how I understand it perfectly. My whole family watches the Flash series on the CW, but my mom stopped because she couldn't understand the whole timeline shenanigans thing. But I could, fairly easily. And I understand this perfectly, even if it's confusing. And at 8, Spider-Man 2099. Miguel O'Hara was born in New York City many years after the end of the Heroic Age, which is our modern day of hero stories. Eventually in life, Miguel becomes the head of genetics program at Alchemax, intended to create new super soldiers they call Corporate Raiders. Great name. Miguel is inspired by Spider-Man and uses records of him as a reference in hope that one day he can create a similarly powered person. After a human test subject dies, Miguel wants to resign. However, his boss, Tyler Stone, instead tricks him into getting addicted to Rapture, a highly addictive drug that only he can provide to Miguel, if he keeps working for him. But luckily Miguel had put his own genetic code into the machine during initial experiments, so he attempted to use it to set his DNA back to before he got addicted. Smart plan. Except Miguel's rival Aaron Delgado sabotages the machine, causing Michael to gain 50% spider DNA. He survives the sabotage but then realizes he has spider abilities. His boss sends men to try to find this new spider person, and Miguel dons a costume to conceal his identity while he combats his pursuers. However, some people actually believe that Miguel is the original Spider-Man back from the dead and thought to bring back the return of Thor. I've said it before, but Spider-Man 2099 is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man because Edge of Time is one of my favorite Spider-Man games, and that costume is just dope as hell. Like, look at it. Ah! And it's 7XS. Jenny Ognat is the granddaughter of Barry Allen and was kidnapped by the Dominators, even though at first she did not show any signs of super speed. Her super speed only activated when she saw her father being tortured by the Dominators. She was able to escape with her father before fire from the Dominators caused their base to explode. After this incident, she checked herself into a lab to get help in controlling her super speed. Once she did, she was drafted into the Legion of Superheroes, at least if you look at the comic version. In the Arrowverse, XS is the first daughter of Barry Allen and Iris West Allen, played by the wonderful Jessica Parker Kennedy, who came from the future during seasons 4 or 5 of that show to meet her father and get to know him, and train alongside him. She appeared at her parents' wedding and various other places in season 4, and only really made an impact in the season 4 finale where she helped Barry destroy the Starlab satellite that the Thinker had sent crashing to Earth. Her helping her father caused events in the timeline to be moved up, like the appearance of Cicada and the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, which was probably only because Arrow couldn't get enough seasons to make it to 2024, unfortunately. Since Emily Bett had left and Steven decided it was time to say goodbye. So, I blame you, XS, for ending Arrow. So.
Number 6, The Fallen One. The Fallen One is a version of Norrin Radd who comes from a very dark future where Thanos wins. He first appeared in issue 15 of Thanos from 2016 in the Thanos Wins storyline. While he is pretty swiftly defeated, it is only because those he goes up against are even more deadly than him. And even then, it takes a few issues before the fight against him is actually concluded. So it's not like you're in, you're out. It's not a one and done. It's a few issues. Norrin Radd, aka the Silver Surfer, became the Fallen One after he was imbued with black matter and also boasts, of course, of the power cosmic, in addition to wielding Thor's hammer Mjolnir. He also comes leading the charge of the Annihilation Wave, so he's got a lot going on. He got all this power in the hopes of standing a chance in the final showdown with Thanos, as one of the last beings left alive in the universe, one of the final people to actually fight him. Sadly, he does fail, but he still manages to look deadly and badass while doing so. So you gotta give him some points for that. Number 5, Superman. John Kent in Future State takes up the mantle of Superman after his father. This also happens after his father left Earth, and many of those who he helped believe that he actually has gone missing, possibly to never return. That's what people think is going on with OG Superman. Well, we skip through the future timeline and Future State with this version of John from this future being shown as a very heroic character. We also see some things that he does in this futuristic timeline that seem, well, not so heroic, like when he bottled the city of Metropolis. John believed he had no other choice and that this was kind of the most peaceful solution to fixing the problems that the city faced at the time. However, he later is forced to confront the fact that he took away the freedom of the people of Metropolis when he made this choice for them. Future state John Kent is dangerous because he is willing to do whatever it takes to protect the city of Metropolis, which sometimes means taking actions that other heroes like Supergirl find questionable. Number 4, King Thor. King Thor might be one of the most powerful future heroes on this list, but he also is only so deadly and dangerous because he's living in a time where he has to be. King Thor is the alternate future version of Thor from the alternate Earth of 14412. Here Thor goes on to become the Allfather and lives beyond the point where Midgard becomes a lifeless husk as a result of Thor's once more again villainous brother Loki, the god of mischief. At one point while battling Doom in the future, King Thor is granted the Phoenix Force by Logan, who is currently bonded to it at that time, and is able to use that power to defeat Doom. Considering that King Thor will do whatever it takes to defeat those who would oppose him, and considering how much power he wields, even when he doesn't have the Phoenix Force, I'd say he's a pretty dangerous future hero. I wouldn't want to go up against him. Number 3, Cosmic Ghost Rider. I would say Cosmic Ghost Rider is one of the most dangerous heroes on this list because he's not entirely mentally stable, which also makes him a lot more unpredictable. Cosmic Ghost Rider was originally Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. When Thanos attacked Earth, Frank made a deal with Mephisto, following his death, to become a spirit of vengeance, a Ghost Rider, so that he could return to Earth and get revenge on Thanos for all of the people on Earth that he had killed. However, by the time Frank returned to Earth, there was basically nothing left to avenge, and Thanos had already left, leaving the planet empty and desolate. Frank wandered as a Ghost Rider for years, and in his solitude, lost his mind. He would go on to become a Herald of Galactus in an attempt to defeat Thanos, but would eventually submit to being Thanos' Herald after realizing that fighting against him was pretty pointless. Number 2, Booster Gold. Booster Gold is demonstrably dangerous as a hero from the future, mainly because he has no idea what he's doing. He has tons of knowledge of what is meant to happen in the main continuity and present day that he traveled to from the future, but he has no idea of how messing with the past timeline or anything like that could affect the present day or its future. We see how dangerous he can be when he attempts to even do good, like saving Bruce's parents in the past so that they can be there for his wedding. Unfortunately, in doing so, completely messes with the timeline to the point that Booster is actually forced to travel back in time and make sure that Bruce's parents are killed, and that poor young Bruce is basically there to witness their deaths. It's also kind of implied that Booster being there and fixing all of that is actually what caused their deaths. It's pretty crazy, it's pretty trippy. Booster might have some valuable knowledge as someone from the future, but he doesn't have the finesse needed to know when the timeline can be tweaked and when it should be left alone to avoid catastrophes from manifesting in the future. Basically, do not let Booster time travel and mess with the timeline. It is not a good idea. Number 1, Iron Lad. Iron Lad is not specifically from the future, but he does go on to become a very dangerous villain who returns from the future. Iron Lad, who was a member of the Young Avengers, it turns out is actually destined to become Kang the Conqueror, who has many different villainous personas throughout the years. I won't go into them right now, but you know some of them. And he's also known for his time travel antics. He often travels back through to the past from the future to enact all kinds of elaborate plots. As a Mortis, he had a hand in creating White Vision. Kang also at one point turns Iron Man evil, brainwashing him into becoming his loyal servant and villainous right-hand man. He's basically behind a lot of evil things that you're like, what is even happening here? And then it'll be like,